This is a test.
There's a man of the hour.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Fable here. So this is the first podcast, Three Kings. Let's go over to the subreddit. Let me just start by introducing what it is that we do here in this little community. Subreddit to share our experiences following any kind of paranormal recipe or ritual, not just the titular Three Kings. We will not attempt to establish what is true or false, nor to judge anyone's beliefs, but to simply respect and support the people who choose to share their paranormal journeys with us. Why would anyone follow paranormal recipes? Some do it for the thrill, others do it for introspection or to resolve pending inner conflicts. These recipes and these experiences are real. We're not here to debunk anything. We certainly do not know all there is to know, because by definition, paranormal phenomena cannot be measured scientifically. And we certainly do not encourage anyone to do anything dangerous or stupid. Right? So that's probably the most interesting of all the rules. And after reading all that, basically what it means is that this community in Reddit is for people who have tried to understand, is my guess, what lies beyond the mortal coil. We want to see if there is really a paranormal world out there, if there is more beyond what our senses tell us that there is. And there are ways to reach those answers. And we are all trying to find those answers because we all think those answers are worth looking for. So in this podcast, we're going to run it weekly. It's going to be Saturdays, 9 p.m. Eastern. We're also going to be sharing this in YouTube, and we'll see if I can get it in iTunes. We'll see if I can get it in Spotify. Basically, we would just want to share the experiences of people who have tried all of these rituals and what has happened to them. We are not guaranteed to be believers. We are skeptic friendly, right? We understand that not everyone has to be dogmatic about what is true and what is not true. And if someone can offer a scientific explanation, if such a thing exists, we are certainly welcome to entertaining those and just trying to understand them too. as best we can. After all, many of the things that we take for granted today and that we call science today were certainly seen as paranormal a few hundred centuries ago. Sorry, a few hundred years ago. That's too much time. All right, so enough of my blunders. I introduced myself. I created this Reddit a long time ago. I think perhaps 7 years ago, I want to say, based on some experiences that I myself went through and that I posted about. And people became interested in trying to emulate them. At the time, I thought it was a terrible idea. In fact, the name of my original post was, "Please do not try this." I should have known better. The internet obviously tried it, and a community sprang out of it. And we've been doing this, for a long time. So that's me, and that's really all that's relevant to say about me. With me, I have my friend and co-host Sean. Hey, Sean, say hello.
Hello, Sean. Or wait, that's me.
Sean and I have been friends for years. We have done a number of projects together. He knows more about the occult than a lot of people that I know. He's yeah. And not just the occult. Sean is a walking encyclopedia on any number of things. Ask him about comics. Ask him about comic books, role-playing games, video games. I mean, I admire. I know I'm springing this on you, Sean. Unannounced, you didn't know I was gonna say this, but I truly believe it, man. I admire all this stuff you have in your head. So
Oh, I appreciate it, and I admire your productivity.
just trying to be, create something in your limited time on Earth. So thank you for being here, Sean. And our guest today is Mr. Yara. So am I pronouncing it right, Yara?
Yeah, Yara for short. I also go by Frater Yara Marud, but that can also be kind of meddlesome for some people, so I just go by Yara.
I'll stay with Yara. I'll stay with Yara. And Yara himself hosts a podcast. You can find it at fateblindpodcast.com. I've been listening, as you can see, to some of the episodes. I find it very interesting. If I may, my impression that I get after hearing this is that you are someone who is genuinely curious about exploring the unknown and the paranormal and the occult, and you don't take yourself very seriously. I mean, the podcast that I've heard is very lighthearted, and you have banter with your co-host. It's like very pleasant to listen to, if I may say that.
Right, no, absolutely. I do have very much of a vested interest in the occult. Um, I've been an occult practitioner for about 20 years. I was initiated into the Illuminates of Thanateros, the IoT, back almost a decade ago. And we decided to start the podcast to try and help newcomers into the occult. So that's why we don't take it too seriously, because a lot of magic or occult podcasts out there we found were far too academic or like armchair magician kind of things and kind of pushed newcomers away. And so we take ourselves not seriously at all, because we want other people to realize, yeah, you could just jump in at any time. You can do this too.
Very interesting stuff. I don't know if you are looking at the screen on Twitch. If you are, by the way, please mute it. Otherwise, we're going to hear an echo. But I'm streaming my screen on Twitch, and I have the Wikipedia page for the Illuminates of Thanatheros, if I have it correctly.
Yes.
Very interesting. Founded in 1978. And
Yep.
yeah, so the plan was for you to introduce yourself, which you have, and then we were gonna talk about your ritual, the one that you posted to Three Kings. Before we get into that, though, I want to take just a little brief detour, if I may, and talk about this Illuminance of Thanatheros organization. I mean, you already told us a little bit, but
Yeah.
please give us a
Okay.
little bit more.
Okay. First of all, by saying that I'm initiated into it, I need to preface the fact that I speak only for myself. I do not speak for the organization whatsoever. This is all myself. But it's an international fraternity of chaos magicians. And so what it is you've got people all over the world who have gone through trial and tribulations and all of these other things that you need to go through in order to be initiated. If we see that you are up to snuff with your chaos magic practice, and we get together. Sometimes we do magic and we do occult things, like we do rituals and things like that, which is why when I had told you that since I had posted my experience on the subreddit, I've got quite a lot more experience under my belt since then.
I see.
Since it's been almost 10 years since I posted that, and I've done innumerable rituals since then.
This is really interesting stuff. I can already think of 100 questions that I want to ask you about just this organization alone. So this is going to be a good show. Now, I remember you told me before the show that your computer was running a little slow. I think that you opened Twitch, and I think I know that because you started to break up. Probably
Yes.
your computer is starting to struggle. So
Yep.
yeah, maybe
I'm just
minimize Twitch
sticking
so
with
we can hear
Discord.
you. Yeah.
I'm just sticking with Discord.
Excellent. Very good. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly fine now. So, all right. So, great. So, again, Three Kings is this place where we do rituals. So, I want everyone in the podcast to learn about one of the more interesting rituals. This was posted, as you can see here on the screen, 7 years ago. And the person who posted it, I was going to look it up, and I wanted to ask him also as a surprise guest. I can't. He deleted it. And
Yeah, I saw that.
so mystery author of Sages of Four. So Yara, had you heard of Sages of Four before this post?
No, I had not, which is, with all of the steps that were involved in it, was one of the things that really drove me to want to go through with it.
Interesting. Have you heard about Sages of Four anywhere else outside of Three Kings?
No, I had not. And it had actually driven me towards that, along with the Three Kings ritual that you had originally posted, had driven me towards the concept of what I call non-paradigmal magic, and delving into that more in depth.
Non-paradigmal magic. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so within my belief system, we have what are called paradigms. And so what a paradigm is it's a different way of thinking about reality, thinking about the world. Most of the time they fall into the kind of catch-all of religion. So there's a Hindu paradigm, there's a Christian paradigm, there's a Buddhist paradigm. All of these are different paradigms.
Okay.
But with Three Kings and Sages of Four, there isn't a paradigm. There's no pre-established pantheon of deities. There's no structured belief system. There's no dogma. There are no there's nothing telling you how you should and should not behave. It's just all focused around the ritual itself. So it's non-paradigmal.
I
Go
see.
ahead.
Is this somehow, this makes me think of the name that you chose for your podcast, Fate Blind. Is this like race blind or color blind or any kind of blind? Basically, you don't care what the fate is. You just accept it for what it is. Is that right?
Yes, because within chaos magic, belief itself is a tool. So typically within the ritual itself, you believe what you're doing 100%, whether or not outside of the ritual you actually do. So I could jump into a paradigm, or into like the Golden Dawn or Thelemic paradigm, and outside of that ritual, I don't believe it at all. But while I'm in it, I absolutely and totally do.
I see.
And so it fits really well in with that, with the chaos magic, because with belief being a tool, we also pick and choose what things actually work for us. And so we'll do the ritual, and if it doesn't work, we won't do it again. But if it does, we'll figure out what aspects of that ritual work.
I see. This all makes perfect sense to me. I don't want to speak too much about Three Kings, but I'll just say this: it was grown in a perfect petri dish of of nothingness. Right? It's a bubble, because I certainly didn't know what I was doing, and maybe I shouldn't have done it if I didn't know what I was doing. But it's not like we had things to do, right? The one thing we had in Juby was time, and we were doing trial and error things. And it's exactly what you said. We didn't have a belief system. We didn't think that this would please this or that entity, or not. Sometimes not even a particular reason. We just started trying stuff, and it somehow kind of worked. And then we refined it, and then it worked a little bit better, and then we refined it again. So
Right, and
very
that's
interesting.
all we do. And on the podcast that I have, the Faith Blind Council, we teach, or each episode we teach different like practical magical things of doing practical occult techniques and things that you can do. And the first thing that we teach in like the first episode is you need to journal, write down everything that you do, and so that way you can go back and compare your own notes to figure out what works, what didn't work.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I have a comment in the chat. Scorching Rose, he says, or she, that's interesting. I know a lot of occults that are more academic. So that makes me think of things like Telema and the stuff that Crowley was doing. And I don't know if you want to count LaVeyan stuff in there. Would that?
Well, yeah, that'd work. I mean, I've done the Levian rituals. I've done a lot of Thelemic rituals as well, and it is very academic. But they also, like with Thelema, you had Israel Regardi, who was working under Crowley. He was able to take all of these notes, and he was basically the secretary for him, and he kept all of the notes, and they went back over the notes in order to create, or in order to repeat the process, which is what, or how we approach it. We approach it from very much like the scientific method kind of thing. Keep track of your notes, find out what works, discard that which doesn't.
Yes. And that makes perfect sense. If one day all this stuff that we consider paranormal, if one day is going to become science, is because of people who act that way. People try to apply the scientific method to it and take notes.
Right, absolutely. And like you had said you wanted to talk more about my
Yes,
beliefs.
that
um
go ahead.
so what I personally follow is what falls under the psychological model of magic, which there are multiple different models, which are really just explanations or perceived explanations for how it works. And under the psychological model, basically how I realize that this works is I'm actually tapping into my own subconscious, or into, as Carl Jung put it, the collective subconscious.
Mm. You know what? I happen to believe something very, very similar to that. Because, again, I don't want to make it about me or about Three Kings, but a lot has changed in my life. And where before I was leaning more towards the believer side of the spectrum, today I'm more in the middle. Today I think that there are certainly things out there that we don't understand, but a lot of the things that we don't understand we could if we only apply things from psychology and biology and physiology. And one day I'll give what I think is my scientific explanation for why the phenomena of Three Kings works. But it will not be in this podcast. In this podcast, I will do the Sages of Four. So before I ask you about your experience and how did it work for you, I'm going to briefly read it for people listening.
All right.
So this post, like I said, is 7 years ago. So whoever was writing this at the time, he says, I was reading Three Kings, of course, post a couple of weeks, astounding response with God. Knew this subreddit would be perfect place to share this. I've been looking for a while. All right, so the author had this in him and was looking just for a place to type it down. Three Kings does work, however, it is an extremely rudimentary ritual. Thank you, and I agree. I completely agree with some missing pieces and additions that wouldn't matter in a regular summoning ritual like Statues of Four. All right, I do not recommend anyone attempting the ritual I'm about to describe. Thank you. So I don't recommend it either. I had many positive experiences, some frightening ones. If you are like me and stupid enough to do it, basically this is the same advice that I gave when I wrote Three Kings. I said if you're gonna half-ass it all the way, so it won't work. And
Always whole asset.
right, right. But exactly, like either do it all the way or not at all, right? It's better to completely fail or to completely succeed, just don't do it in the middle. So, materials. This requires a candle, a bowl, a scoop of dirt, a cup, a jar, a mirror, something made of silver, a chair, a compass, a fan, a ruler, a bottle of water, and a book. So, down here in the comments, I noticed your comments from 7 years ago where you were saying kind of like this, because the rest of the ritual goes into explaining where do you place each item, right?
Yeah.
It says put this one in the center, and then this put 16 away for that, and then this one 4 feet away from that. So to skip all of that, let's just go into the graphics. I believe this is the first one that you asked. You said, would this be the layout for the ritual? And then a lot of people started to just have refinements, and I think this was the final version. So let me see if I can zoom in. I can. So walk us through this, Yara. What's going on here?
Um, well, so from what I remember, since I don't have Twitch pulled up right now,
Oh, my
um,
bad, my bad. I can do it. I can do it. So in the center we have the silver object, and that's gonna become incredibly important very soon because of the final part of the ritual that I'm gonna go into.
yes.
And it's called Sages of Four because it's the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. So to the north you put a candle, it's fire. To the east you have a mirror. Is the mirror wind? Am I remembering correctly?
No, though I think so.
I
Yes,
think it's
because
wind because west is water and
well,
water is water.
there was you had a jar of air. You had just a
Yes,
jar that had air in it.
right.
The mirror you had to place in whichever direction you were facing.
Thank you. And yes, I stand corrected. So the jar of air facing east, the bowl of water facing west. So candle is fire is in north, and then the cup of dirt is south. So that gives you your four directions. Then, if you choose to do it in this diagram, the one that I have open right now, happens to be facing east, which is why the mirror is there.
Yep.
And you place yourself between the center, the silver is the center, and whichever direction you're facing. So if you were doing east, then you place
Hmm.
yourself between the silver and the jar of air. And then to both sides of the jar of air, which again is if you're doing east, then you put your chair and your book. And I think that is about the placement. What did I
Yeah.
miss? Oh, I the fan. There is a fan from the south blowing north for some reason.
Yes. Let me see. Hmm.
It
Yeah.
it, it
Because
doesn't.
okay, so I do have it pulled up on my phone. I do have the stream. If
Oh,
I
okay.
remember correctly, yeah, from what I remember, the fan was south, or if I remember the directions and how I did it, the fan was placed behind the mirror.
Over here. But here's where it gets interesting. The ritual itself is warning us that it can have different results depending on which direction you choose.
Yes.
So I'm going to read what it says here. It says each direction has different rewards, different experiences, different consequences. North generally has more positive outcomes. By the way, how interesting. I noticed this too. When I don't know why, like I don't know anything why, but I noticed through trial and error of Three Kings that North went better. So there's something to be said there. Let's pick up that later. So he says north is more positive, is mostly 50-50. East can be tricky and will leave you in burning questions. West may cause you to feel a little depressed and paranoid for a while, but sometimes the trip is well worth it. Do not, yeah, and he itemizes this. Do not ever face your rituals south. It's not worth it. All right, Yara, tell the audience what did you do? Which one did you choose, Yara?
Yeah, I went south. I don't like when people tell me what to do.
There you go. There you go.
So so when you started, don't try this. Well, I'm going to try it.
Exactly.
Don't If you do try it, don't face south. Well, now I have a direction to face. Okay.
That's exactly what you jump in to do. So here's what you're supposed to do. After you set everything up, then you basically leave the room. You leave the candle there. You leave everything. And by the way, there's pretty specific stuff. Like the book has to be open to page 48, right? And place paper side down on the ground. So after you leave everything, then you have to go to bed and sleep before midnight. And then you come back at 4 a.m. You are
Hmm.
supposed to turn off the lights, close the door, light the candle. And here's where it gets tricky. And people who know about occult stuff, I noticed in the comments, once they read this last part, they sort of became horrified. It says you need one last component, your own blood, just a
Yep.
drop. Ah! And I could see people in the comments like getting really like, no, no. And then it says, you shouldn't be doing this. Drop of blood needs to go on the silver object in the center. Kneel with the palms of your hands on the floor in the space between the fan and its closest object. So basically, the direction that you want to go, and stare at the silver object. Listen, wait, be patient, don't lose any sleep. Any visitors, oh, this part is good. Any visitors you get should be gone by morning. Not always the case with East. What you are summoning aren't necessarily spirit. Check your windows.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So that is what you were supposed to do. So Yara, what did you do?
I faced south, as you know.
Yeah.
So I remember waking up and going in because I had an entire room set aside and dedicated to this. I went in there. I was really hazy when I got up because I had just woken up in order to go do it. I sat down, had everything set up. Everything was dark. Once I had smeared the blood on, I had a 1921 Morgan silver dollar that I had used.
Right.
Once I had smeared the blood on there, I felt that the entire room just got heavy. And there was just like this oppressive feeling in the room, which I kind of anticipated, but I didn't expect it so quickly.
Yeah, I remember reading from your experience. You wrote, "It was surprising how quickly things started." I don't think that's usually the case, so that surprised me too. Like with Three Kings, it takes a while. It takes a long time. Here, it looks like right after you put the blood on the coin, like things started to happen right away.
Yeah, things got really heavy, and once I did that, I knew that I was in for it, like just completely. So I was staring at the mirror, and after a little bit of time, I started hearing footsteps in the room with me, and I had the door closed. There was nobody there. I know that there was nobody in the house with me, and
there were some people asleep, right? Elsewhere.
Yes, that's right. There was my roommate who was asleep, and she sleeps like a rock, or she slept like a rock, so I know that it was not her. But I started hearing and they were coming from my left, which would have been against the wall. The door that goes into the room was behind me, so it was to the north. So the footsteps were coming to the left, and while I was staring into the mirror, I was looking at myself, and I noticed that the image started to change.
Yes.
And the image changed from just clearly my face, and the image in the mirror started getting more and more pale. And my eyes started looking sunken, and I was just staring, just kind of taking this in, and I saw that reflection smile.
How did you not jump out of the room and run away for a long time?
Willpower.
Yeah, pretty much. And I've done stuff like this before, and I've encountered entities and other things before. So I knew that there was something there. I didn't know what it was, but having seen that, I'm like, okay, this is what we're dealing with now. And I started hearing talking to the right of me. There was just whispers. And the more I listened to it, the more I could tell that it was not in English, but it was a very low, very deliberate whisper. It was telling me something, and it was telling me something that it wanted to get across that I needed to know, but I couldn't make it out.
And what do you think the tone of it was? Because some of the times that I've experienced things similar, what I mean by similar is whispers or voices. In my case, it was like a chorus of voices, like a lot of them. The only thing I could get out of them was the emotion behind them. Like in my case, they were angry. Like,
yes, this was very, very angry, and it was a very low, deliberate voice. So it was a whisper, but I could make out individual syllables. So it was kind of like through oh, mir dum bo.
Jesus.
And it's like, okay, that's some serious shit. So after a while, like I tried talking to it, I tried connecting with it, but there was nothing there. So I just closed out the ritual. Like I blew out the candle. I started laughing, which
So this is the part. It says, "I closed my eyes, brought my hands together. My banishment proved difficult as my throat felt paralyzed." So these hands together, I admit I'm not very knowledgeable in or not as much as I should be. Is that like a common motion when you want to
it's
banish?
no, not necessarily. I've used it, or I used it in this sense because it gave me a focal point that was not the mirror.
I
Um,
see.
So there was the mirror in front of me, and instead of focusing on what I was seeing, which was this gaunt face that was
Yes,
looking back at me, I brought my hands together, which gave me something else to look at
I
and
see.
focus outside of it. And then the banishing proved difficult. My throat was dry, and how myself and a lot of others that I know typically banish is with laughter.
Yes,
Because laughter is one of the few things that humans have that we can control. And a lot of emotions that we have stem from laughter. So, like, crying is just laughter evolved with sadness.
I see. Let me ask you something. What do you think would have happened if instead of doing this, instead of bringing your hands together and just try to laugh and break out, what would have happened if you had just walk out of the room and run? What do you think would have happened?
Probably the same thing that happened anyway, which the banishment I had wasn't great enough, so I had to do further banishing, which was
Ah,
after I had closed everything out. There was still clearly something there. Because once I had left the room, we had pet dogs that were there. They refused to be anywhere near me. Um,
yes, I noticed that. Very interesting. It says, I noticed that the dogs in the house avoided me at all costs. However,
mhm.
it says the first thing the cat did was jump on my chest to stare at my face as I slowly began to fall asleep. That creeped me out.
Oh yeah, and it creeped me out too. Like I'm just trying to lay down and forget this. Once I lay down, the cat just jumps on my chest, and this was a cat that wasn't particularly fond of me,
Wow.
but he just came up, jumped on my chest, laid there, and stared at me while I fell asleep.
And you know
Your
what?
Um,
blood,
I
your
think
blood gives it a bridge to anchor itself in, and that's
it does, and not just a bridge to anchor itself, but to anchor itself to you.
wow.
yeah,
Because
like the whole possession thing.
right, and it's it's easy to stay possessed. In well with to a certain degree, depending on how one's mind works, you can stay stuck within a certain mindset and have some entity or outside influence act on you, but it's very difficult over long periods of time.
This
It's
is I just noticed that I kind of skipped over the kicker here. It says, so this is before. So basically, what you were trying to do was laughing, because it says here, after I kept laughing, my body beginning to shiver. After a few minutes, the room began to warm. My body stopped shivering, and the light from the candle seemed to brighten. Finally, I opened
mm,
my eyes. Right. So this is the point. If it was a movie where you would think, oh, everything is fine, and then the
right.
movie hits you with the jump scare. It says, a car drove past the house, illuminating the windows, and for a brief moment, an unknown face staring at me from behind the glass. Holy shit.
Yeah, there was something there, and it had latched on for like the next day or two until I finally decided, no, I need to get rid of this. I need to banish completely and absolutely. And then after doing so, it had gone. Like
How did you know that it was still there? What sort of things were you noticing?
going throughout my day, I could still feel that there was a presence. I could still feel that there were like eyes watching me when I was alone. There were darker thoughts that had come into my mind.
I
Um
see.
just kind of like the I forget the term for it, but invasive thoughts, like thoughts that clearly weren't mine. that had just come in, and they were very, very dark. I
Wow.
remember that when I had gone to bed the next night, that there were I kept having visions of gore, and really long teeth was another one
Oh
that
my
kept
god.
popping up. Um, but I knew that after all of those things together, that thing was still latching on, so I had to do a bigger banishment, a more thorough one.
Did you talk with anyone while you were going with these things? Did you have any sort of support group? Anyone you could say, "Hey, I'm having visions of really long teeth, guys. What do I do?"
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had my roommate who was telling me not to do it in the first place. Um, but I also had my pact members who I was talking to while I was going through with this, and they had just told me the same thing, which is just do another banishment, do a better banishment. Um, but they had made sure keep notes and do it again.
So these people that you talked to, it sounds like they were somewhat knowledgeable in
Yes.
occult thing. So what was their opinion of you having done this thing that you basically read from the internet? Did anyone like scold you? Did anyone say, "What the hell are you
Oh no.
doing"?
Oh no, there was no scolding at all. They actually were like, "No, keep going. Figure out what the purpose of the ritual is.
I see.
Find out like what the different directions are. Do it again. Do it again. Find out what it is. Figure out what it is."
Wow. So that's very supportive. So basically, you did it. You had, I would call this a bad experience, right? I mean, it's a bad outcome. And what they're telling you is, listen, it's okay, clean it up, and then do it again. That's kind of like when you fall off the bike and it
Yep.
says, you got to get on the bike again and lose the fear of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like figure out what like this person clearly some person had written a ritual and it had an outcome.
Yes.
What is the purpose of it? Like, is it just reaching out and talking to whatever? Who is it actually contacting? What's the purpose of contacting them? Why would you contact them?
Yes. Yes, I see. I see. In the case of Three Kings, I can answer that a little bit because I've seen it happen many times and people basically got answers. If I was to be a skeptic, then my skeptic answer is they are talking to hidden parts of themselves. They are bringing to light things that were buried and that need to be addressed. And for some reason, sometimes we go through things that we don't want to deal with. And instead of dealing with them, we just bury them, deep in our psyche. And experiences like this bring them to light. And if that was true, then I would say that's a positive thing because this thing you are obviously need to be dealt with. And if this forces you to deal with them, then it's a good thing, right? You're getting it done. So,
Right.
yeah, I think that this could have a similar outcome, maybe if you had chosen a different cardinal direction.
Possibly. Well, I took their advice and I did continue to do it. I did the ritual around 7 or 8 more times facing
Wow.
different directions. It's just after posting the first one online, it was like how many people want to continue to read my basically study notes.
Oh, I
Um,
can I can answer that right here.
Quite a lot of us.
32,076.
fair enough.
32,076. Yeah. 40 of them online right now.
Fair enough. So I had to go through I had to go through all of my notes, and I went through them and figured out like what the purpose of it was after all of my contact, after talking with them, and from my own research and what I was able to figure out, this ritual and the purpose of it is to contact lost egregores.
Ah.
And
Give us a definition for people who have no idea what does that mean.
okay, so an egregore is like a thought form. Um, Thought form is another term for it. It's typically a thought form that is shared between multiple people. Um, and so one thing it's shown up on Reddit a lot is I've seen the name Tulpa that is used. That's another word for egregore. Um, but
But with the definition being that Tulpa is more like a personal and Egregore is more like a
right,
group.
Right, exactly. But they still have the same kind of form. So they still have their own opinions, they still have their own thoughts, they have their own will.
Interesting.
So
I hear Photomechas is like that.
yes, yeah. And so I had figured out that the purpose of this ritual was to contact ones that had been lost. And I had also figured out that the direction was based on how the egregore was lost.
Interesting.
So,
Interesting. Okay.
um, if I forget how it's or how you had it pulled up
Oh, I'll
with
bring
the different
I, I,
directions.
I'll bring it back. But before we go there, let me use. I know that we're going very slowly, but I'm thinking of somebody who has never done this before and has no idea. So we established that an egregore is a thought form. It's a collective thought form, and
Yes.
we also said that this is ritual helps you reconnect with egregores that are lost. So implied here is that if the egregore is not lost, presumably it's interacting with you.
Yes. I mean,
How does that work typically? Help us visualize what does that look like or feel like.
how the egregore interacts with you.
Yeah, how does it work normally? And that way we
Uh,
can tell the difference on when it's lost, and if it's lost, you would want to get it back via 4 stages.
so it's typical. Okay, so how an egregore is lost is, or how it contacts you is the same way that I had kind of described through a sense of it being there, through hearing things like invasive thoughts. You can hear thoughts that are not yours. Um,
Ah,
Hearing things that come from outside of you. Um, Getting opinions that are not yours, and how we chaos magicians utilize egregores is we give them tasks, we send them out to do things.
what
Like
kind of things?
assistants.
Like an
Yeah,
assistant. What kind
yes.
of things? What kind of task can they accomplish?
Okay, so they're how we follow things, they're kind of rated. You start with sigils, and then servitors, and then egregores, and then god forms. Sigils are very simple things. You kind of have your task set forward and you give it to the sigil and it goes out and does it. But since it has no will of its own, it has no thoughts of its own, if it comes in contact with an obstacle, it kind of fizzles out and dies.
Hmm.
Um, a servitor is a person, or like a tulpa, it's very personalized. And so it has a will of its own and can work around things if there's an
Hmm.
obstacle that comes in place. An egregore is with a group form, has its own thought process that it can go around obstacles and it can solve problems.
I see. It feels like increasing levels of sentience. Would that be an
Yes,
appropriate word to use? Sentience?
absolutely, because then after that you have god form, and a god form is, as its name implies, a god which has its own will. And so instead of it enacting what you want, you basically try to appease it to do what you want.
Whoa, whoa. Well, I have read the subreddit, and surprisingly, it's not as occult as I thought. The people in that subreddit seem to believe that a tulpa is sort of like a partition in their brain hard drive. If I wanted to
Yeah.
make an IT analogy, so they think that this sentience that they interact with in their head, I'm going to call it imaginary friend, and it's not pejorative. It's just something simple that people can understand.
No, that
Uh,
totally works.
yeah. So this imaginary friend is running out of their own hardware, right? It's powered by their brain, and it lives in its own little cubbyhole in their brain. And they have conversations with it, but there is nothing necessarily supernatural about it, as far as we can believe that a single brain can hold two sentiences.
Right. And this is further shown if you follow like what I believe is the psychological model of how magic works. Yes, it's your own psychology. And carrying on that whole partition issue is you have the research that was done with the whole split brain, and patients who have undergone split brain, which if you aren't familiar with that, it's so side of your brain, there's an organ called the corpus callosum, and the corpus callosum is how the two hemispheres of your brain interact and communicate with each other. In severe cases of epilepsy, they have corpus, or they will remove or sever the connections with the corpus callosum,
I see.
and that will give a patient split brain. And patients with split brain have been shown to have different personalities depending upon which hemisphere is enacted.
Wow.
So if you follow along that kind of mode of thinking, then yes, it's totally, completely possible to have that within one brain, which would follow under the rule of like servitor. So the
I
servitor
see.
is in your thought versus an egregore, which is a group thought form, and the group helps give that entity gives that entity like a personality,
I see.
all of these different ways of interacting.
I see. I think we're making a lot of progress because this is bringing us back to Sages of Four. Now we understand that it goes from sigils to servitors to egregores. Now we understand that if we lose an egregore, apparently that's where this ritual comes in.
Right. And as far as my belief system goes, a lost egregore is when the people who power that egregore have been gone, have been lost, and it falls within the collective subconscious.
Very interesting. So one thing that struck me is you said the reason there are four directions here is related to how you lost your egregore, and you would use a different direction depending on how it was.
Yes.
Tell us more about it. Yeah, how does that work?
So, from what I remember, it was so the reason you didn't want to face south
Yeah.
was because the egregores that you would contact facing south were because those who had given it power had died
Oh,
before their mission or their activity was completed. And so they were left in this kind of impotent rage because they could never complete what they were created to do.
I see. Do you think egregores are capable of feeling pain?
Absolutely, at least an existential pain,
Yes. Uh,
because it's a sentience that's created to do something or to create or to perform a task or do something. And if you were created to do something and given that task, and then all of a sudden you can't do that task,
yes.
it, you'll be filled with this same impotent rage. Like, I need to do this thing, but I can't do this thing.
If I had a soundboard, I would play the Mystics voice track.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, because
And
that's exactly what that episode was, you know?
right. And so, like, they can't do the thing and they become angry. And so, basically, facing south, you are contacting angry Meeseeks.
They're
I
like,
I
come
would have.
on, Jerry.
Oh my god! I never thought I would have gotten a Rick and Morty. That's how high IQ is this podcast, ladies and gentlemen. That's we made it. All right, so that's south. So do you happen? If you don't remember, that's fine. Do you happen to remember the meaning of the other three?
Yeah, can you pull up what they said the direction, like, or
Yes,
not
I
not the
have the
image,
chart.
but
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, the
like
the,
what?
the other one. This
Yeah,
one. East, air, and fire. South. No, but this is a different one. I'm gonna go to the
how
to the one in
or
the experience itself.
yeah, up to the experience or the directions and how they said, like, if you face this certain direction, you'll be left with questions
So
or
let's start with north. It says north generally has more positive outcomes, which, by the way, I experienced myself. Though at most it's 50-50. That's what it
okay.
says.
So from my notes, north, you came to positive outcomes because it had completed its task, but had then been because it had completed its task, it was just left to go. Like, people stopped remembering it, stopped giving it energy.
I see. And it makes sense because it's the opposite of South. South is the
Right,
frustrated one who never completed it. So
right.
interesting. All right, very good.
Um,
East, it says East can be a bit tricky and will leave you with burning questions.
east from my notes was that the egregore had been lost because it was never given a very concrete direction. Um,
Ah,
it was just kind of created for something, but there was no parameter given to it to actually like go out and do something. It was just created kind of for the hell of it.
I see. That's why it leaves you with burning questions, because it's confused itself,
Yes.
right? It was given an ambiguous direction, doesn't know how to solve it. So now you are, I don't know if I want to use the word summoning, but you're somehow invoking it again. It's going to communicate some of that confusion back to you.
Right. And then the last one, which was west, you're left a little depressed and paranoid for a while. Um, but the trip is well worth it. And from my notes, west, when you faced it, the egregore was lost because it was simply forgotten.
I see.
So people stopped giving it energy. It wasn't able to complete its task, but people stopped feeding it. And so it just became lost. It
Very
still had a
interesting.
direction, but wasn't able to fulfill it.
So these are the four possible outcomes of an egregore. North, mission complete. South, mission incompletable, and I'm very frustrated. East, what the hell is the mission? And west, I know what a mission is, but I care more than you do. Basically.
Right, right. And
Inter-
so, like, from one of the depressed ones, I distinctly remember I had faced west for that one, and I had contacted what essentially was a clown
a clown.
from yes, from like it was from pre World War One.
Oh my
Some
god.
clown had been created by a father in order to make his children happy. But then
Wow.
something had happened to the father, and then the children had forgotten that clown. And
So
so,
interesting.
right. And so it left with this feeling of depression because that clown was just there to make the children happy, but the children had forgotten it.
How did you come to see this? That's incredibly specific. World War One, clown, father, children. Did it come into your head? Did you see it in the mirror? How did you learn this?
I saw it in the mirror and I spoke to it.
Wow, you had a conversation.
Right.
What
I mean,
kind of voice did it have?
it was it was a very melancholy voice because it itself was sad because its entire purpose was to make these children happy. And so it was just kind of very low and slow.
Oh my god. And you did this 7 times. Did you always have 7 outcomes where you actually interacted with something?
Yes, I did. Sometimes they were intelligible, sometimes they um most of the time they were intelligible and I was able to figure things out about them, and it's through doing that that I was able to come to the conclusion through all of my notes that this was the purpose of doing the ritual itself.
I see. So, do you think that in having done that ritual, did you help them in any way? Did you give them closure, release, anything like that?
I sometimes I think that I did, um, but I also think, or I it had also come to mind like talking to these entities, um, that you could figure out what they were created for, and some of the ones like if you want to contact these egregores and give them like energy again and utilize them and talk to them and become friends with them, you would have to figure out what their purpose is because sometimes the purpose is not something you would want to use. So, like one of the ones from Facing South, um, it was the purpose of it was to achieve ego death via pain.
Wow, let's unpack that. Let's unpack every word of that sentence. Uh,
Right.
e- let's define ego death, and then let's say why would anyone want that?
Right. Okay. So ego death is the loss of oneself. You no longer believe in, like, you are not yourself anymore. This happens a lot with like higher doses of psychedelics,
Okay,
um, where you've taken that and you just become one with the universal whatever,
Joe
with the universal
Rogan.
subconscious.
Joe
Yes.
Rogan speaks of that all the time.
Right. And that's ego death. And the purpose of this egregore was to assist whoever created it to achieve that through pain.
Jesus. So you basically would hurt so much that you would forget yourself.
Yes.
Phew, that sounds, yeah,
That's some Hellraiser stuff right there.
exactly.
No, absolutely. That is fucking Hellraiser. um, and so, yeah, I could keep talking to this egregore, but I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
So,
what happened? Did you actually feel pain when talking to this egregore?
yes, my bones hurt.
Jesus. And
So I just didn't want to really deal with this thing anymore. So I just kind of banished and walked away.
did they ask anything from you? Do they want you to do anything?
No, they wanted to achieve their purpose. They wanted to like help me with that, but I didn't want that, so I wasn't going to let that happen.
I see. So, for instance, the clown, right?
Yes.
His purpose was to brighten up the life of a child. That child is no longer a child, right? Who knows? He might even be an old
Right.
man. It might be dead. So, what can it do? Did it make you laugh, and will that satisfy its purpose? And now it vanishes.
It could have. I mean, from what I had written down, I kind of helped tell it, no, like your purpose can't be completed, but we like I want to thank you for your service. And it seemed as though it was content with that, but I don't know if it's going to move on to the I can't complete my service and now I'm pissed off kind of thing.
Right, right. That's I think how it could be explained. You know,
Right.
next thing you know, he's offering little red balloons to people out of sewer gates.
Right. And but the one with the ego death, from what I remember, is I had written its name down. I had gotten its name and I hadn't spoken it in years. I had not said its name in years, but I remember saying that entity's name, and this was recently, within the last couple months.
Yeah.
I had come across these notes again. I had said its name out loud, and my cats left the room.
Jesus. So here's a thought. I always want to bring a little bit of the devil's advocate, a little bit of the skeptic angle. So
yeah, no, that's fine.
Imagine we had a skeptic here. Could it be possible for any of these egregores where you actually have conversations with them, they're intelligible conversations, right? These words. Could it
Yes.
be possible that in those conversations they actually give you some sort of identifying information of the person who created them? And then we bring up Google really quick. And I'm not saying not doing it right now, but like if you take notes, right, and you say, okay, this clown was created by Mr. Jonathan Franz, whatever, in Paris, and I'm gonna go to Google 3 days from now, and I'm gonna type his name. He's gonna come up. I'm gonna see that he had a child. Like that would satisfy any skeptic.
Right. And go ahead, do that. And if it's not, then like if it's completely non-verifiable, sure.
Yeah.
I'm talking out of my ass, but as far as I'm concerned, what I'm doing is working for my practice.
Right.
So
I would find that incredibly interesting. So I don't want to encourage you to do it again because it seems like it's a little dangerous.
And I'll be the devil's advocate and say, go ahead and do it. I'm
not. Listen, if you do it again, if you happen to have any other conversation, right, try asking him something identifiable. A date, a name, a city. And if that happens, by all means, please let us know. He's going to make a stir. People are going to be like very, very interesting. Because this is the kind of thing that we can bring it to a researcher. We can bring it to somebody who is like pretty serious about trying to verify substance behind these things. And, we give them verifiable information. Guess what? It's now verified. And that would be newsworthy, in my opinion, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think we have any questions from the chat room. Let me check very briefly here in Discord. I'm going to give everybody who is listening in Twitch or in Discord a few seconds to type a question if they want it. But otherwise, I think this has been tremendously interesting because what I think, here's the part that surprises me the most. When you look at the original recipe posted by whoever, anonymous person 7 years ago, it says nothing about egregores.
No.
Absolutely nothing. It tells you here's how you do it, and here is vaguely what happens, right? He just said good outcomes, don't do this out. Nothing about egregores. Through trial and error, you discover something that makes perfect sense. You
Right.
discover how the egregores were lost. It's either mission complete, mission incompletable, don't know what a mission is, or you don't care about the mission. Those four cardinal points makes perfect sense. You discovered that on your own. To me, that sounds like a little bit of verification.
Yeah. Which any of the rituals that are posted on this subreddit, take notes. If you do them, take notes, redo them. Like I follow when it comes to my own practice, my occult magical practice, whatever. I keep notes and I follow a scientific method. If it doesn't work, then I'm not going to do it. I mean, I wouldn't have done any occult practice for the last 20 plus years if I didn't see verifiable results.
That is amazing. And that gives me confidence that the stuff that we are dealing with is very real. I mean, it's already real in the sense that it impacts our lives. So even if there was no other proof or no other evidence, it's already real enough, right?
Well,
It makes people think.
with right, and within my belief system, with the whole psychological model thing and how magic works and whatnot, magic, in my opinion, has always been like one or two steps ahead of science.
Yes.
So you have alchemy that came before chemistry. Before medicine, you had people that like drank from a river that healed their pains, that it turns out there was a willow tree that was leaching its roots and giving aspirin in the water.
Exactly.
That was easing their pains.
For all they knew, it was the magical water spirit healing them, you know?
Right.
As far as they knew.
With psychology being such a new science, it's only like psychotherapy has only been practiced since really Sigmund Freud in the 19th century. It's a relatively new science. We don't know why the placebo effect works. We don't know why the brain does half of the shit that it does.
Right. Amazing. We do have a question from someone in the audience. Rusty says, what is a conversation with an egregore like? Does it show any physical presence or is it like a voice?
Like I've had it where it has been like the intrusive thoughts. Other times, if I focus hardly enough on like how I said that I can hear the voices, I can hear answers. Generally, they come as intrusive thoughts, though.
And are you able to formulate specific questions like inside your head? Is it like talking to a tulpa?
Sort of, yeah. And so you'll have a thought. You don't necessarily need to speak out loud if you're getting the intrusive thought. You would just ask a question and then you'll immediately get an answer to it.
Can they read your thoughts? In other words, you think of asking something, but you don't actually want to ask it. But guess what? It's too late. They already read your mind.
Not typically, from my experience, no. Unless you formulate an actual question, they can't really read what you're thinking.
I see. Well, that's
like because by asking a question, you're projecting that thought out to it.
That is very comforting because if someone could read my mind, they would walk away very slowly. They would walk away. All right. I don't see any more questions from the audience.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Sean.
Shoot.
Right. Is one something that really stands out about this diagram? You bring the diagram back up.
Yes, sir. It's right here.
So why are the north and south cardinal elements reversed? Because traditionally fire is the south and earth is the north.
Yes, and I'm not entirely sure as to why that is. From what I could gather, I know that within traditional like Wiccan practice versus Thelemic practice, you do have a reversal when it comes to tools. So when it comes to traditional Wiccan practice, you have an athame representing fire versus in Thelema, the athame represents air. So that could have been the reversal, Thelemic versus traditional. I didn't get so far into my research in order to figure that question out, because after around 8 or 9 times, and I figured this out and realized like I couldn't really find an egregore that I would want to work with. I kind of abandoned my project.
Oh, visually in the head, I imagine that the flip is almost like an inversion of the doorway between worlds, like you're placing yourself into the upside down.
Oh no, and that absolutely could be because the fact that you're waking up and immediately performing this ritual puts you in the liminal space, like the hypnagogic state.
Yes.
So by already putting you in the hypnagogic state and performing this ritual where you're already half asleep and playing with your mind by having the fan going so that way you're obstructing your audio input, by having the candle going where you're obstructing your visual input and leaving it in also a liminal space, it could very well be like you said, and leaving just flipping everything over and having that also in a liminal space.
That makes a lot of sense, and people who are familiar with tarot know the whole like inverted upside down sort of element to this. If you're basically you're connecting with Earth, but you're connecting with an inverted Earth, and Earth is traditionally
Mm.
tied to growth and abundance, life, nature, but inverted would be the opposite. It'd be death, it'd be ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Oh,
Right.
that makes perfect sense because that is the Egregore who failed his mission.
Nope. The other thing
Wow.
I wanted to point out was earlier you mentioned magic and Clark's third law. It needs sufficient advanced technologies
Yeah.
and distinguishable from magic.
Right.
Notes. One last thing, and this is like a sort of rumor thing floating around. I know this is like a whole another episode of stuff that we probably don't want to get into because we probably have other places to go. We should at this point. But there's this rumor going around that the Satan concept, people were saying was an actual an alien AI that functions like Roko's basilisk. I don't know if either of you know your
I
Roko's
do.
basilisk, right?
Yeah, I'm
Could you
aware of
explain
it.
it for the audience at home?
So Roko's basilisk is basically it's a thought experiment sort of in which by knowing about Roko's basilisk you are indebted to future AI so that because they're bound to kill all of humanity, and with Roko's basilisk you don't want to be enslaved by the AI. So by knowing about this, you are indebted to them to stop their development.
Yeah. So essentially, like this Prometheus giving fire to humanity thing creates technological advancement enough so to create a system that opens a doorway for this AI to come into our world. But it's theoretically in Roko's Basilisk series that it's already established that in the future and that we're in the past of the timeline that leads to that future. So we help build that doorway for it to come into our world.
Right.
Jesus.
Anyways, that's some
I,
scary shit I don't want
I,
to talk
Which
I,
about now.
thank
I
God I brought you
mean,
in, Sean.
I
No.
mean, honestly, it's kind of like a more intelligent version of the game, really.
Ha.
So, like, it's kind of giving some validity to that. But seeing Satan as a form of AI, no, I would disagree because I see it as the flip side of God in dualistic traditions, dualistic paradigms. You have the one who is the giver, you have the one who is the deceiver to take you away from that.
Well, it's also the all for everyone else or the all for one versus the one for yourself. It's selfishness versus selflessness.
Right. And then you get into right hand path magic versus left hand path magic, which isn't
Wow.
necessarily it doesn't necessarily exist in non-dualistic paradigms like Shinto.
Gentlemen, this is a lot to take in. You have given me material to do a wiki dive for hours and hours. Thank you. I think it was a great first episode. I'm very pleased myself. Yara, you're a wonderful guest. We'll love to
Thank
have
you.
you back. For everyone watching, if you think this was worth your time, please tell everybody that you know to come to Twitch TV/Fableforge for the episode and to come for Three Kings in Reddit if you want to post about any experience that you've had, or if you want to post any way of getting an experience. We call these rituals or recipes. So, anything last you want to say, Jara?
Well, if you want to learn about practical magic and how to actually do it yourself and build your own practice, then you can tune into my podcast, which is Faith Blind Council, which is found on Spotify and all sorts of different platforms, or you could go to faithblindpodcast.com.
faithblindpodcast.com. So everybody, that's when you can hear Yara. I've been listening to several of his episodes already, particularly the one about neurodivergence in magic. That's my favorite one so far. I encourage everyone to go learn. Sean, any last parting words you want to give to our audience before we close?
Well, I'm not going to plug my books here, but I do write books, and that'll come up at the point in the future. Two, I'd say be very careful. Whatever you do, always take precautions.
Make sure your banishing game is strong.
Yes, your abjuration must be high.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for a great first episode. It's going to be on YouTube for sure, maybe in Spotify, maybe in iTunes. I'll find out the way. And thanks again. See you next Saturday.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye bye.